Lesson 17, Functions. In this lesson, you will learn how frequently used sections of code can be turned into reusable functions. The topics covered are 1. Using functions, 2. Defining functions, 3. Arguments and return values, 4. Returning success or failure, 5. Default argument values, 6. Variable scope, 7. Using library files, and 8. Including library files. Let's get started. Using functions. A function is used to make a task that might consist of code into a routine that can be called using a single instruction. PHP contains many functions that perform a wide range of useful tasks. Some are even built into the PHP language. Others are more specialized and are available only if certain extensions are activated when PHP is installed. There is an online PHP manual available at www.php.net that is a really great reference. Not only does it provide documentation for every function in the language, but the manual pages are also annotated with user-submitted tips and examples. You can even submit your own comments too, if you like. This example uses the date function to generate a string that contains a formatted version of the current date. The online PHP manual gives the prototype for the date as follows. This means that date takes a string argument called format and, optionally, the integer timestamp. It returns a string value. This example sends JFY to the function as the format argument, but timestamp is omitted. The echo command displays the string that is returned. Defining functions. In addition to built-in functions, PHP also allows you to define your own functions. There are certainly some definite advantages to using your own functions. Not only do you have to type less when the same piece of code is executed several times, but a custom-defined function also makes your script easier to maintain. If you want to change the way a task is performed, you only have to change the function definition once, and it will stay that way throughout the entire script. Here's a very simple example that shows how a function is defined and used in PHP. The function keyword defines a function called add_tax that will execute the code block that follows. Notice that the code that makes up a function is always contained in braces. Putting amount variable in parentheses after the function name stipulates that add_tax takes a single argument that will be stored in a variable called amount variable inside the function. The first line of the function code is just a simple calculation that multiplies the amount by 1.09, which is basically the equivalent to adding 9% to that value, and then it assigns the result to the total. The return keyword is followed by the value that is to be returned when the function is called from within the script. Running this example produces this output. This particular example is one that could frequently be used in a web page. A good example is a page that lists all the products available in an online store. You could call this function once for each item that is displayed to show the after-tax price. If the tax rate changes, all you would need to do is change the formula in add_tax, and every price displayed on that page would be updated. Arguments and return values. Each function call consists of the function name followed by a list of arguments in parentheses. If there happens to be more than one argument, the list items are separated with commas. Some functions do not require any arguments at all, but a pair of parentheses is still required even if there are no arguments contained in them. There's a built-in function called php_info that generates a web page containing lots of info about the PHP module. This function does not require any arguments, so it can be called from a script that is as simple as this one. If you create this script and point a web browser at it, you will see a web page that contains system information and configuration settings. Returning success or failure. Because php_info generates its own output, you do not need to prefix it with echo, but for the same reason you also cannot assign the web page it produces to a variable. In fact, the return value from PHP info is the integer value 1. In this example, the mail function is used to attempt to send an email from a PHP script. The first 3 arguments to mail specify the recipient's email address, the message subject, and the message body. The return value is set up as an if condition to check whether the function was successful. If your web server is not set up to send email, or if there's an error when trying to send it, the script would not run and the mail function would return 0, letting you know that the email could not be sent. A non-zero value would let you know that the message was sent off to your mail server for sending. Default argument values. The mail function is a good example of a function that takes and actually requires multiple arguments in order for it to run. In this case, the recipient, the subject, and the message body are all necessary in order for this function to be executed. The prototype for mail also specifies that this function can take an optional 4th argument, which can contain mail headers. If you were to use mail with too few arguments, a warning would result. For instance, a script that looks like this will produce a warning that looks like this. These 2 examples work just fine. They show that to have more than one argument in your own function, you only need to use a comma-separated list of variable names in the function definition. To make one of these arguments optional, you need to assign it a default value in the argument list, the same way you would assign a value to a variable. This example is a variation of add_tax in which 2 arguments, the net amount and the tax rate, are added on. The rate has a default value of 10, so it is an optional argument. Using this function, these 2 calls are both valid. The first example uses 10% as the default rate, where the second one specifies a 9% rate, producing the same behavior as our original add_tax function example. Variable scope. Why must reason values be passed into functions as arguments? Well, the answer has to do with variable scope. These are the rules that determine what sections of script are able to access which variables. The basic rule is that any variables defined in the main body of the script cannot be used inside a function. Likewise, any variables used inside a function cannot be seen by the main script. When called, the add_tax function calculates the total, and this is the value returned. However, even after add_tax is called, the local variable total is undefined outside that function. This piece of code attempts to display the value of a global variable from inside a function. When this script is run, no output is produced because the value variable has not been declared in the local scope. If you're going to access a global variable inside a function, you must use the global keyword at the top of the function code. When you do this, you can override the scope of that variable so that it can be read and altered within the function. Here is an example. In this code, the value of the value variable function can now be accessed inside the function, so the output looks like this. Using library file. Once you have created a function that does something useful, you will most likely want to use it again in other scripts. Instead of copying the function definition into each script, you can use a library file that can store and maintain your function in one place, including library files. You can also incorporate an external library into another script by using the include keyword. Here the example includes tax.php so that add_tax can be called in that script. If you need to, you can also make sure that a library file is only loaded once by including the include_once keyword. If a script attempts to define the same function a second time, an error will result. Using include_once helps to avoid this, especially when files are being included from other library files. Another good tip: it is better to have a library file that includes several other files, each containing a few functions, than to have one huge library file. Conclusion. In this lesson, you learned how to use functions to modularize your code. You can now test your knowledge in the quiz area, access the scripts we learned in the lab, or go through the lesson again. The choice is yours. Thank you for choosing Sam's Teach Yourself.